This is the third in our series of ambassadorial briefings. And I'm immensely privileged and honoured to be able to welcome the ambassador here, not least because my second son did 2 tours in Afghanistan, and particularly because when he agreed to come up here, he said, yes, I'll come and talk about education. I will talk about the needs of Afghanistan, but on one condition, and that is that I'm able to meet young men and women from your armed forces who went to Afghanistan and have come back so that I can personally thank them on behalf of my country and my president. So tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock we'll be up at the Castle of Edinburgh. We'll meet the General Officer Commanding Scotland and meet young men and women who were there, and on tomorrow evening, after we've gone up to St Andrews to meet the faculty and students and Vice-Chancellor there, where the ambassador will speak, we will go across to Glasgow, where before speaking at the University of Strathclyde, he will again meet servicemen and women and thank them. My feeling about this evening is that we have, if you like, as a country, committed already much of our treasure to trying to pull Afghanistan through its challenges. And therefore the very idea that we should be thinking tonight about what can be done between Scotland and Afghanistan to ensure, if you like, that the sacrifices that people, many of whom we will know families who've sent people out there, that those were not, if you like, in vain, and that we remain committed to the process of building that critically important country surrounded by neighbours, not all of whom are particularly friendly to it. Now, Ambassador Mohammad Daud Yaar is extraordinary in the sense that his career spans so much of what has happened in Afghanistan. When he was born in Kabul, Kabul was a sophisticated city, very Western. It was a monarchy, it was a king. So as the capital city of Afghanistan, he graduated from its Faculty of Economics in 1973. And then he taught at the faculty. So when he comes to stand up here, he is entirely used to talking to groups of students and others. And he taught there before receiving a Fulbright scholarship to study at Bowling Green State University in Ohio, where he was from 1974 to 1976. And after receiving a master's degree in economics there, he returned home and continued at his teaching position at Kabul University as assistant professor. In addition to teaching economics, he worked as an advisor to the Department of Economic Analysis in the Ministry of Planning and the Central Statistical Office of Afghanistan until June 1978. Well, those of you that know anything about Afghan history will know that in April of 1978 there was a communist coup. And the ambassador, as he is now, escaped persecution on political grounds and fled and moved to the Federal Republic of Germany, where he joined the PhD program at Cologne University. There he received his doctorate degree in economics from that university, and whilst doing that, he served as the CEO of an organization set up to help refugees fleeing from persecution from the communists in Afghanistan and settling in Pakistan and elsewhere. And he and his lady wife, who's here with us tonight, they worked extremely hard to do something about the lot of those refugees. And as part of his job, he travelled to Afghanistan and established humanitarian aid centres in areas that were free of Soviet occupation. But in talking with his wife, when he was not there, the Russians were looking for him, and they would call on their house to try and find out where he was in order to endeavour to capture him. Anyway, in 1987, he and his family actually migrated to the States, where he took a teaching job at California State University, East Bay, and taught as a lecturer there from 1988, 20 years, until August 2008. And in that year, he returned to Afghanistan to serve his country. In January 2009, he was appointed as economic advisor to the Office of the Chief of Staff of the President, and in February 2010, he took up the position of the Director of Policy and Oversight of the National Security Council Office. And in February 2011 was appointed Director General of Economic Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And then in June 2012, last year, he was designated as Ambassador to the United Kingdom by the President. If you think of that period, and if you think of what he's been doing, And you now realise that what we're going to hear from the ambassador is his view of what the future looks like in Afghanistan and what the needs will be, and how the educational and business establishments of Scotland can help, if you like, realise the dream that Afghanistan has. I think you would agree with me that he is highly qualified to talk about the topic on which he has so kindly agreed to speak this evening. Your Excellency, thanks for being with us.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm elated. My wife and I are both very happy and elated to be here tonight among you. It reminds me of 20 years of my long life on the campus. I would like to thank the Business School of the University of Edinburgh for giving us this opportunity to be among you tonight. And I particularly thank Mr. Gao and the Asia Scotland Institute for making it possible for us to be here tonight. As Mr. Gao mentioned, I'm an old guy. I have experienced 10 kings in Afghanistan during my lifetime, 10 different regimes. And I have had the fortune to be an observer of the events of these 10 different regimes. And pretty soon we'll have the 11th one, which is next year after the election. The elections will be next year in April. After experiencing all these 10 different regimes and the ups and downs of the national life of Afghanistan and my personal life and my family's life, I have come to the conclusion that education is the solution or the remedy to almost all human ills that unfortunately befall human societies. But before going into that particular subject, I would like to say a few words about the recent history of my country. As Mr. Gao mentioned, in April 1978, the communist coup happened. Before that, we had, for 40 years, we had a very benign monarchy, which was based on a constitutional framework. We had elections, we had a parliament, we had a senate, we had embarked on the process of developing the country and educating a highly traditional society. But unfortunately, as a result of the Cold War, Afghanistan turned out to be the last ditch in which that war was fought. And from 1978 until 1992, the country was under occupation, and also the communist regime was committing all sorts of atrocities. One of the major atrocities of that period is that the new regime, purged almost all people who were educated in the Western world, in America, in Europe, accusing them of being surrogates for the so-called imperialist system of the world. And that was the biggest blow for the country, and until 1992, as I mentioned before, this process continued, and finally the communist regime fell apart, imploded in 1992. After that, unfortunately, as a result of the collapse of the state, a civil war began, and it culminated in the rise of a group called the Taliban. The Taliban ruled from 1996 until 2001. During this period, the country became a heaven for Islamic fundamentalism and international jihadist or terrorist movement. On September 11, 2001, we all know what happened in New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania. And as a result of that, although that event was appalling and very painful for the rest of the world, but it opened a new page in the history of my country, Afghanistan. The international forces invaded the country in December 2001, and they are still there. Since 2001, the country has experienced humongous changes to the better. But the challenges still remain. Afghanistan still is being mentioned in the popular press as a burden on the shoulders of the international community. But I personally, as a citizen of that country, feel that the country has come a long way, and the investments that the international community have made in terms of treasury and blood have paid off already and will pay off in the future. Why is Afghanistan important for us, and why should the world make such a big investment and commitment to a small country like Afghanistan of 30 million people, a country the size of Texas or perhaps France? The reason is that the reason is twofold, in my opinion. One is the strategic location of the country. It's in the middle of everything. It's in the middle of Asia, and on the north we have Central Asia, and beyond that we have Caucasus and Russia, and then on the northeast we have China. In the south and east we have India and Pakistan and India, and in the west we have Middle East, including Iran. So if trade and resources are supposed to flow between these important regions of the world, Afghanistan is the key to connect these regions together. The second reason, in my opinion, is the moral responsibility of humanity in general to support people that became victim of the Cold War, of the competition between the superpowers of the world. The Afghans feel that we didn't have any other guilt or sin except that we loved our freedom and we defended our freedom, and in the process we lost over 1 million people. We have now about another 1 million injured and maimed in the country. We had at one point over 7 million refugees from the country, and we still have about 3.5 million refugees living in Pakistan and Iran. And only in this country, in Great Britain, we have over 100,000 Afghans who have been dispersed and uprooted from their own land. And we didn't do this because we wanted, we were forced to this situation. So that is the second reason, a moral responsibility or a moral duty of humanity. The third reason is that Afghanistan is a very rich country in terms of natural resources. We have a humongous amount of mineral resources, untapped mineral resources. The U.S. Geographical Survey, Geological Survey, has determined that we have over $1 trillion worth of minerals, all sorts of minerals. We have rare earth materials, we have lithium, we have uranium, we have gold, we have silver, we have oil, we have copper, we have the best copper and iron deposits in the country. So in the future, as resources dwindle, Afghanistan will be an important source of these mineral resources. And also, as I mentioned before, Afghanistan is strategically very importantly located. There are over 4 billion people living in Greater Asia, and if these people are supposed to be connected to each other, Afghanistan is the center and the key for that integration and connection. Now, to come back to the current situation, at the time that the Taliban were toppled, there were only about 200,000, 300,000 students in the country. Now we have, thanks God, more than 9 million boys and girls going to school. We have built about 5,000 kilometers of new roads. We have 60 radio channels. We have 17 TV stations. We have the freest press and media in the region. We have a democratic system. So far we have had 2 presidential and 2 parliamentary elections, and the next presidential election is planned for next year. But in spite of all these developments and this progress that we have had, I personally believe that the most important achievement that we have had has been in the area of education. You might ask, well, why education is important? I think education is important for a number of reasons. It's not only the fact that education allows us to make a living and go and find a job. It's more than that. First of all, I think education imparts civic behavior. It improves our behavior towards each other. And for promotion of peace, of course, civic behavior is the key. It liberates the mind. One of the problems in a traditional society, in a society dominated by tradition, is bigotry and intolerance. Education is the strongest tool of creating tolerance and allowing people to accept each other. Again, this helps peacemaking. And of course, education leads to discovery of new ideas and innovative thinking. So instead of people sticking to the old ideas, to outdated ideas, and to their prejudices and preconceived ideas, they start thinking new and liberating themselves from the dictates and tyranny of tradition. All this helps socioeconomic progress. And socioeconomic progress, of course, we all know, it's kind of very obvious in European societies, in America, that socioeconomic development or progress or growth is something that should happen. But it is very sad to report that it's not the case in a lot of parts of the world. We take in the West, people take progress and economic development and rising incomes for granted. In other countries, in Africa, in Afghanistan, in large parts of Asia, this is not the case, and education can change this situation. I was reading, an article by Bagehot today. He says that in all customary societies, bigotry is the ruling principle, and it is true. Bigotry is the ruling principle in an educated society. In that sense, education helps to create tolerance in the society. Now, another author, Giuseppe Mazzini, says that the foundation or the backbone of progress are three things: vote, education, and labor. And all these three, the other two, education, of course, separate, but the other two, the vote and labor, also depend on information and education. So they both boil down actually to education. Again, education is, in this sense too, education is the key to progress and socioeconomic change. Now, on the other hand, socioeconomic development requires, again, three things. Civic discipline, which I mentioned, is the result of education. Political stability and political participation, which depend, the outcome of which depends to a large extent on education and information. Democracy can thrive only in an environment where people are educated, where people have access to accurate information and can make their decisions, their voting decision, based on policy platform, not on tribal lines or not on religious bases, but rather on policy platform. And for that, education is needed for people to understand the meaning of different policies. And finally, efficient markets. Efficient markets, those who are economists here or business people, business theorists and business students, they know what efficient markets are. It's based on information. You have to have information, and in order to acquire information and use that information productively and profitably, you have to be educated. You need education. So, in my opinion, in my 6 years of life, I have come to the conclusion that education is everything. At this point, I would like to refer to a number of facts about the situation in the country, in Afghanistan. Because as I mentioned before, in the press you read a lot of negative stories about Afghanistan and the outcome of the intervention of the international community in Afghanistan. The newspapers, especially Guardian, is filled with horrible forecasting about the future after 2014, the deadline for the withdrawal of the foreign troops. But I can, as an Afghan citizen and also as an observer of the history, I can assure you that nothing will go wrong in Afghanistan. My optimism about Afghanistan, its people, and its future is based on a number of facts. I'll give you those facts. Fact number one. It is true that the world in 2001 embarked on a project of state building or nation building. And a lot of people are not happy with the outcome of what the world and the Afghans did to build the state and the nation in Afghanistan. In my humble opinion, state building is not a science. Nation building is not a science. It will willy-nilly be associated with errors and with mistakes. So that is why my fact number one would say, because of the complicated nature of human life and society in general, state building as a political undertaking is not and cannot be based on a testable mathematical model. A lot of people, when they think about some problems that still exist in Afghanistan, they think that nation building should be the science. And you add 1 unit of oxygen with 2 units of hydrogen and you get water. That's not the case in nation building. There are millions of people. Everybody has his own personality, his own ideas, his own goals, and you cannot manage everything 100%. Fact number two: because of fact number one, state building will always remain an art. It will always happen in a trial and error fashion, and it will always be fraught with uncertainties, mistakes, and failures. Therefore, fact number three, the proper measure of progress in any nation-building effort is not the set of short-term or medium-term transactional mistakes and shortfalls that happen during the process, rather the long-term trajectory and direction of change that the state-building project displays. In this sense, Afghanistan is doing wonderful. We're going that way. We have increased the number of our pupils, our students, from less than 300,000 now to 9 million, over 9 million. And 43% of that 9 million are women or girls. Why do I emphasize the education of women and say that, well, 43%? Women are the backbone of the society, without doubt. When you teach a woman, you teach the whole family. You teach the children. You teach the father even. You teach the grandchildren. You teach the whole village. And in that sense, we have been, for the first time in our history, we have been able to empower our women. Now, the 25% of the parliament consists of women. When you watch TV in Afghanistan nowadays, over 60% of the commentators and critiques and writers and speakers and anchors are women. This is happening for the first time. It has a huge transformative effect on the rest of the society. Educating women not only enables the society to earn more, a better living, it also creates the impetus towards change, because women love to live in peace. They hate war. We know that, because the first victims of any war, especially in those parts of the world where we live, are women and children. And by educating women, actually you are promoting peace, and by empowering them. So in that sense, we have done a wonderful job in mobilizing 50% of the population which had no voice in our national life. Now, they are active, they have gained a voice, and they are affecting our destiny. Fact number four: as far as ground realities in Afghanistan are concerned, there can be no denial that during the last 12 years, Afghanistan has experienced great transformative changes in major spheres of socioeconomic life. Fact number five: the transformation of the last 12 years have enabled Afghans to take great strides towards recovering from the devastations of 3 decades of direct and indirect occupation. There have been a lot of proxy wars in the country. Now we are getting to a point where we have our own national security forces, 350,000 of them, and they are very capable. Of course, we have shortfalls in terms of equipment and technology, but we're sure that based on the promises that were made in Tokyo, in Chicago, and in Bonn, in these major international conferences on Afghanistan, we will get our forces well equipped until the end of next year. Fact number 6, the upward trajectory of socioeconomic transformation, in spite of aberrations and mistakes, is apparent in the transformation of the state of mind of the Afghan people. And actually, we economists say that development is a change, is a state of mind. And that is what is happening in Afghanistan. The genie is out of the bottle. You cannot take people to 2000 or 1999 period, because they have seen the benefits of freedom, they have tasted the sweetness of liberty, and they will not be going back. Fact number 7, as a result of national and international efforts made during the last 12 years, the Afghan society has entered a new, higher stage of socio-economic life, a stage that is more amicable for accepting change and modernization. As a result, it is reasonable to assume that the transformation of the last 12 years in Afghanistan will remain irreversible unless something very extraordinary happens. What are those very extraordinary things that can happen and can bring the change back, move or push the changes back? The first one, a complete disengagement of the international community from Afghanistan. If the world again forgets about Afghanistan and leaves it to its own crude tools, we may go back. A complete disengagement of the international community from Afghanistan, similar to the one that happened in the wake of the fall of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union fell, and America and Europe thought, well, why should we spend money on Afghanistan, or why should we be interested in Afghanistan? They just forgot. Whereas, believe it or not, you might laugh at me, it was Afghanistan that caused the Soviet Union to fall. If it was not the only cause, at least one of the important causes. The Soviet Union could not afford to spend 20 million gold rubles. It was a lot of money. Once they did, they collapsed. The economy went down. The second extraordinary thing that can happen and take Afghanistan back is an open or proxy invasion of the country by one of its neighbors when international forces have left. Fact number 9, the probability of either of these two events happening seems remote from where we stand today. I think the international community has learned a lesson and will not abandon Afghanistan. Of course, we will not have the same kind of money flowing in, and that's good, because those who know economics, they know about moral hazard. If you pump too much money into a country, then people become lazy and they don't work. They think that, well, we'll be given money. So I as an economist, I'm happy that this money will be smaller and can be spent more prudently than spending, sending money, billions and billions of dollars into a country without having a transparent and accountable mechanism to spend it. And the possibility of an open invasion by Iran or Pakistan or these other countries, Central Asia, does not seem realistic right now to me. And fact number 10, I think as international forces draw down next year or leave the country, as Afghan forces become more experienced and better equipped, as Afghan sovereignty is restored to the full extent, as men and women of Afghanistan are empowered with political awareness, rights and education, as the promise of a better life takes root, as peace talks with the opposition bear fruit, as our neighbors realize that peace in Afghanistan means peace in their own countries, as democracy becomes a way of life, and last but not least, as an orderly political transition takes place next year in April, the people of Afghanistan and the international community can look forward to a better, peaceful, and less dependent Afghanistan. Of course, for this legitimate dream to come true, the international community must garner the political will to stay on course. And one of the reasons that I'm here tonight, and my wife and I came here, of course, I could not resist the temptation of the invitation extended to me by Mr. Daud. But the reason is just to tell you that Afghanistan is going to win, and you, with Afghanistan, you are going to win with the investment that Scotland and the rest of England has made in the country. There are people, about 446 British soldiers who have lost their lives. Britain each year spends about 280 million pounds or dollars in Afghanistan. All this has happened for the last 6-7 years, and the promise is that this will continue, the money will continue until 2017. So it's not a lost hope, it's a wonderful investment. Why it's a wonderful investment? The reason is that once Afghanistan becomes peaceful and is becoming peaceful, there are a lot of business opportunities, a lot of cultural opportunities, a lot of learning opportunities that exist that could materialize between your young generation in this country and our young generation back home in Afghanistan. We have gold, we have silver, we have oil, we have copper, we have humongous amounts of iron ore, we have rare earth materials. We have everything that can be extracted profitably, and the British and Scottish investors can take advantage of the investment opportunities in Afghanistan. Once the elections, especially next elections, are important. If we have a good election and a good outcome, I'm sure that next year, this time, if I come back, I can tell you that we are out of danger zone. Thank you very much for your attention. Hopefully I did not bore you with my applause.
Well, Your Excellency, thank you very much indeed. Now, the form now is that I'm going to introduce the panel. The panel will pose questions to the Ambassador and then open it up to the floor. As I say, after that there will be a chance to meet the Ambassador outside over a drink. And I'll close the proceedings at the very end. So let me now ask the members of the panel to come up. Professor Susan Deacon is Vice Principal Corporate Engagement, an MBA alumnus of the University of this business school, and a former Scottish Cabinet Minister for Health and Community Care, elected in MSP in 1999. She stood down for politics in the 2007 election, is an active player in the wider public policy debate, has spoken on leadership and change, arguing for greater cooperation across political and sectoral boundaries. I would also like, please, to ask our other panellists to come up. Professor Patricia Jeffery. Patricia Jeffery is Professor Emeritus of the Sociology School of Social and Political Science at the University of Edinburgh. And she has considerable research interests in gender and development, especially childbearing, women's reproductive rights, social demography in South Asia, Indian society, gender and communal politics. So she has a lot to say and to ask about the education of women. And so now I'll come and join the panel, but Susan, I throw it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of you for coming here this evening, and in particular, I would like to add my thanks on behalf of all of you, and of course on behalf of the University of Edinburgh, to the Ambassador for sharing with us what was certainly not a boring contribution, I can say without fear of contradiction, and I think it was stimulating for all of us, not just in terms of enhancing our knowledge, but I hope also challenging us to think about what we can actively do, working with you and others moving forward. Now, I noticed, Roddy, that you suggested the panel would, first of all, put questions to the Ambassador, so I wonder if I could ask you to ask the first question.
Sure.
Because I'm sure you must have several in your mind.
Right, yeah,
Yeah.
probably no. Well, actually, I will ask a question which was posed by the Ambassador also to Hamza Yusuf at the Parliament Building today, which is along the lines of what Scotland can do for Afghanistan. And I'd like to phrase that in the context of how Scotland can engage, knowing and understanding your view of what Scotland's USPs are in one, let's say, particular area.
I think, considering the fact that Scotland has 15 universities,
15, 16? 15.
15, and the best universities, I think Scotland can do a wonderful job in terms of educating Afghan youth. And I would love to see some Afghan students coming from Afghanistan, especially girls, to be educated here and go back home and transfer the knowledge that they acquire here. I think that education, and I also know that Scotland is good in technology, in the area of mines. So these are all the areas in which Scotland can help the country. But my emphasis is again on education. If we could get a few places for our students here, especially in the areas of science and technology. You know, too many people in Afghanistan study political science, which is very, I'm sorry, no offense to any political scientist here. But you know, it bothered me so much. I used to teach, and I asked students, "What do you want to study?" Most of them would say, "I want to study political science." I would say, "Why? There's no bread in political science, only crookedness." You know. But anyway, they liked it. But I want, if it is possible, I want students to come here and learn about geology, about engineering. Especially the country needs to be connected through railroads. So railroad technology and engineering, mining, research. These are the areas in which Scotland can do a wonderful job for the country.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to say that our education system is altogether stronger and more attractive than our weather often is. So I'm sorry if you had a little difficulty maybe hearing.
This is the hydro nation, I go.
Absolutely. Hearing some of the contribution there because of the noise of rainfall outside. Could I move to Professor Jeffery to ask her question to the Ambassador, please?
Thank you very much indeed. I found this all very interesting indeed. I suppose I want to be a bit contrary here. Economists are well renowned for being dismal scientists. I think sociologists have a propensity for being even more dismal. And I suppose the sort of question I would want you to reflect on perhaps is the sort of question that comes to me having done field work in rural North India and in Pakistan, where the obstacles and problems that are going to face anybody trying to develop an adequate education system in a very rural society for the most part, as Afghanistan is, where there is relatively low levels of female literacy, so you have logistic problems about how do you get teachers in place who are able to do their teaching and so forth. The buildings, the facilities are not necessarily very user-friendly for girls and so on. If we're thinking about how to emphasise and improve education for women, we need to think about primary school level, at the very, very basic level. So while it's wonderful to fancy Afghan students coming and studying geology here, we do need to think about that sort of basic rock bottom level of education provision for younger children. So I wonder if you could perhaps reflect on some of the difficulties that you perceive. You've given us a very nice upbeat account, but I suspect there may be some problems on the way that need to be addressed.
Well, you mentioned rightly that primary education is very important. Economics of education shows that the rate of return on primary education is much higher than the rate of return on higher education. That is why the country so far has, the government has spent money, has focused on promoting primary and secondary education for women and for boys too. The higher education area has been overflooded by the private sector because the eagerness to go to university is so big that people are simply paying a lot of money, young people, their families, after all these years, and especially through contact with the rest of the world, through the internet, it seems to me that people have come to the point where they understand the meaning and the importance of education. That is why I have met people who work during the day, young people who work during the day and go to school in the evening, go to university in the evening. This is the first time. In my time, believe it or not, the government not only provided us with dormitories, but they paid a salary, monthly salary, in order to go to school. Now this generation is paying for education. We were paid to go to school, and they pay themselves to go to school. So things have changed. That is why I was talking about the change in the state of mind. There have been humongous qualitative changes in the mind of the people, and that is why they go for education. Even in certain parts of the country, people come to the capital, they ask just for teachers, and they say that give us the teachers, we go back, bring them there, and we pay them ourselves. We build the schools ourselves. In certain parts of the country, in the east and in the south, yes, where the Taliban are still present, we have challenges. We have big challenges. But thank God so far, I haven't heard about a woman teacher being shot or killed. We have heard about women police being targeted, but women teachers have not been targeted. It seems that that even the armed opposition is not totally against educating girls to a certain level. After 9th grade and 10th grade, they might have reservations. But the challenges are mostly cultural. And those challenges, as I mentioned in my short talk there, can be responded to by educating the mothers and the fathers and the families about the importance of education. Education is the only way. It's a long way to go, but that is the only way.
Thank you very much. We have a little bit of time for discussion. We have a very interesting cross-section of people in the room, ranging from students to business people and academics. I would like to open the floor up, either for questions to the Ambassador or indeed to the members of the panel, or for short contributions or comments. We have Aidan with a roving mic here, if you can just wait till that gets to you. Can I get an indication of those that would like to raise a question or point? Okay, we've got quite a few. I'll do my best to bring in as many as possible.
Afghanistan has quite striking demographics and is one of the world's fastest growing populations, and we're also seeing the beginning of populations coming back from being displaced across the border into Afghanistan. As well as the transformation that has already taken place, how do you see Afghanistan's education system being able to keep up with this pace of growth?
Well, your first statement, demographic, Afghanistan is a very interesting country. I'm not saying this because I'm an Afghan, but believe me, it's a very interesting case for the rest of the world. First of all, it's a mosaic of humanity. You find all sorts of people there. You have Orientals, you have Indians, you have Central Asians, you have even Europeans, and other races and tribes and all sorts of. This is the beauty of Afghanistan. It's a country with humongous diversity. In the past, this has worked very, very effectively to the advantage of the country. During the war, unfortunately, it created problems. Now, as we build peace institutions, I'm hoping that we'll get back to a situation where people begin or cherish the diversity. On the other hand, the Afghan population is a very young population. 60% of the population is younger than 25. In that sense, we need the political will, also the financial resources to provide them with education. A very strong challenge that still remains, we are injecting about 500,000 people into the labor market on an annual basis. Unfortunately, the economy has not been able to generate that many jobs or places, employment places. I have talked to policymakers, and I was a policymaker myself. I think this is a very serious challenge. We have to find a very quick solution. I had proposed a solution. Unfortunately, it was not accepted. I said that, well, we have $7 billion in our reserves, foreign reserves. I asked the president to give me $1 billion from there, $1 billion from the private sector, $1 billion from the international community, $3 billion, and build medium-sized or medium-sized enterprises where agricultural products could be kept and processed. And the country is basically an agricultural country. We have water, land, and population. But we don't have, for example, the basic processing factories or plants that are needed. In the month of August, the streets are filled with rotten apples, for example. But during spring or summer, there's no apple. We don't have the kind of facilities to store them and warehouse them. Unfortunately, IMF, the big guy, blocked that proposal and said, no, you have to keep your reserves, international reserves there, and as long as they insist on putting that money into an account in New York or in Washington, instead of building these badly needed plants and factories, unfortunately that would be the situation. That leads to another very dangerous phenomenon, and that is an exodus of the young people, of the talented people. You might have heard on the news, a ship sank at the coast of Italy. There were 80 Afghans in it. All these young people. The reason is that unfortunately the economy has not been able to generate the kind of employment that is needed. Hopefully after the next state elections we will be able to change the policy. You know, when a country is dependent, again as a student of economics, when a country is strongly dependent on foreign aid, this is what happens. Foreign aid comes and is spent on pet projects of the donors, not on the needs of the population.
If you'd like to say who you are, I must admit I'm always slightly cautious that you don't feel the need to label yourself with a particular organisation. You may be very interested for wider reasons, but yes, please, it's very helpful if we know where you're coming from.
Ambassador, I'd like to endorse what you could say. I'm chairman of a charity operating in Afghanistan, Toppled, which I think you'll be familiar with. I can speak, we were first established in 2006. We are very much involved in education. We are teaching students and local Afghans, boys and girls. And only just last week, we were awarded the leading institute in our sector throughout Afghanistan, and that's in the crafts and the traditional skills area. I'm encouraged to hear your remarks about post next year. I think our feeling is that we are well below the radar. We're very much operating within a community where we've restored the community, 113 buildings. We have a health centre, we're educating, primary school, and our hope and expectation is that that will continue. We certainly intend to continue. So I appreciate your words and your support. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that contribution. And if you could bring the microphone down here. And there was a hand over here, just if we go along that row afterwards. Okay, thank you.
Yes, I'm a PhD student at the Roddy Center. I'm doing Islamic Studies as my PhD subject area.
Hold the microphone a little bit closer, thank you.
My question to Your Excellency is with regards to the dynamic pace at which some of the modern projects are aiming for in Afghanistan. And how do you seek to balance that and the more traditional views? For example, you mentioned female empowerment. How delicate is the balance between, how delicate are you trying to maintain that balance between the more traditional views in Afghanistan, but also trying to push the country towards a more modern level? And how do you seek to address that balance? Because maybe it could cause conflict.
Thank you for that.
There is conflict between new ideas and old ones.
Yeah.
Is that what?
Are you okay with that? And this one here, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your interesting speech, Your Excellency. My question is regarding business relation and foreign investment into Afghanistan. As I'm coming from Germany, and I think all of us, like you also mentioned the bad news which the media is almost covering about Afghanistan. What do you think, how can Afghanistan improve this situation and improve the image, so to say, of Afghanistan so that foreign firms are also willing to invest in the country and not thinking about Afghanistan as a place of insecurity and terrorism and ruled by the Taliban?
Okay, thank you. Before I come back to the ambassador on these questions, I wonder if I could maybe ask Patricia and Roddy whether they'd like to make a brief comment on any of the points that are raised there, or add any other points or questions to the ambassador before he does respond. Patricia?
Or perhaps...
microphone.
You didn't give your name, but your educational charity.
Yeah.
I think this is all very impressive. How is it going to be made to scale up and meet the first question that was raised about the demographic, where you have got a very, very large school-age population, albeit a goodly proportion are now attending schools, but there's still quite a lot of slack to be taken up. And I think this raises lots of questions about where is the money coming from for the buildings, for the staffing, for the staff training. Are we talking about foreign investment in that sort of field, or are we talking about money that's coming from taxation within Afghanistan? How are decisions going to be made about this? And who's going to be in charge of what kind of education system comes out of this? You've talked about various kinds of skill training. You've talked about geology and the mineral wealth. What about agriculture, for instance? Is that going to get a look in? Or are we thinking about a trajectory which could take Afghanistan in a very different sort of direction? I think there are a whole lot of questions of this sort which are actually intensely political when it comes down to it. Big decisions have to be made about priorities.
If I follow on in that, because there are three elements to what we've achieved. One is the restoration of buildings. Secondly is the implementation of an institute which was there to foster the traditional arts and crafts and skills. And thirdly, the business regeneration of the traditional arts of Afghanistan in a commercial way. Now, in a sense, I think that picks up on your point. So we have devolved, we have an Afghan board, we hold funds that we devolve, and we have now, we've sold about $2.5 million US of traditional crafts. And as the students qualify, they go out into Kabul or other parts of Afghanistan and start their businesses. So in a sense, and coming from a business background, I would argue that there is money there is funding that can be found. Our role is not to be what I would call charitably imperialistic, if I could use that phrase. It is to enable, and I see evidence that that is happening. And I'm sure the ambassador would endorse that.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I would wonder, Roddy, if you would like to comment on some of these points, and in particular, you have very, very wide and long-standing experience on building business links and levering in international investment and so on. Could you give us some insights into what you think are some of the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead in that regard?
Sure. First thing I'd like to say is that Turquoise Mountain, which actually the Asia Scotland Institute supported an event in the Linlithgow Galleries about a month ago, is the most extraordinary success. Its greatest challenge is what happens as things move on and they engage with other markets. But anybody who doesn't know about Turquoise Mountain, please talk to its chairman afterwards, because if ever there was an example of a part of Kabul moving from a desperate state, literally, physically, under many meters of rubbish from the time of the Soviet occupation, to the restoration of the only part of Kabul actually that operates effectively without power cuts and outages and everything else, Turquoise Mountain is it. And it's an inspirational story.
Absolutely.
Coming away from that though, the great challenge I think for outside investors or people at the business school here who are perhaps thinking about what should they do is what to do and how to get into these markets. Whether we like it or not, whatever the sovereign risk rating of Afghanistan is, it's certainly not AAA. And somehow the developed world has got to come to terms with the fact that the investment that needs to be made has got to be made notwithstanding the possibility that there is a significant element of risk involved. I've heard the ambassador talking earlier today on a number of occasions and with politicians here about how important it is for Scotland, for example, to use the sectors where it's strong to do things in Afghanistan. There are a large number of areas where Scotland, being a very small part of the United Kingdom, is not strong. It is in education, it is in water management and purification, it is in agriculture, and of course it is in teaching. And so there are a lot of people in here, if I was, I guess, 30 years younger, I would say, wow, what an opportunity to set up a business school. To get some mates together, get some investment, and set up a proper business school in Afghanistan to train the next generation of people. So I would say that if you have any thoughts at all about what you might do, think entrepreneurial. The ambassador, when teaching in California, asked the question of his students at the beginning of a course. He used to say to me, when you graduate, what do you want to do? I think so, you said. What they said was, we want to set up businesses. Asking the same question in Kabul, what are you going to do when you graduate? The answer was, get a job with the government. Go figure it out.
Your Excellency.
Thank you. Well, a few important things were raised here, important points. First, the clash between the new and the old is a real clash. As I think I mentioned before also that in order to take forth war and succeed in the war, the society creates its kind of institutions that are supportive of the war. When the war period ends, then the society, the peace breaks out, the society starts to build peace institutions that support peace. There is an interim period where the two types of institutions clash, and the new nascent peace institutions try to stand up and take over and become strong, and the old war institutions that were created during the war, they resist the change. They want to maintain their privileges. I see with my own eyes that kind of a clash between the two sets of the institutions, but I'm hopeful that the new institutions supported by the younger generation, by millions of women who have just found a voice in the national life of the country, will be strengthened, and they will not give up. So it is true that the old and the new are clashing, but there are great chances for the new to win, because the new, first of all, has a political legitimacy. It's supported by elections, by democracy, and by free choice of the people. The old is still depending on tradition, on force, on tribal bigotry and prejudice. That is why I see that the old establishment and the old institutions are losing their strength. Now, it will not happen overnight. We have had 10 years. We have to wait and work hard for another 5 to 10 years until we get the fight resolved. Improve the image of the country. Well, Afghanistan has been in a very bad position during the last 40 years. Afghanistan was caught in the middle of the Cold War, and people looked at Afghanistan in the shadow of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, or the West and the Soviet Union. Because of that, reporting was biased. Now, during the Soviet occupation, again the clash was there. For a long time, we were looked upon in the shadow of the clash between India and Pakistan. Now, of course, China is there, and we have, thank God, we have a lot of left-leaned or left-oriented press in this country and in the rest of the world, which feel a kind of schadenfreude to see that America and the West fails. And they use Afghanistan, unfortunately, as an example, and although it's not a very good example, they want to use Afghanistan, they force Afghanistan to be used, for the purpose of proving the West wrong in intervening in Afghanistan, and that is why they want the project to be introduced as a failure, which is not the case. But that is the reality of political life. You have people who like this system, the Western system, people who do not like it, and as a result, we have been somehow under this competition, or this the resentment against the Washington and America and the rest of the Western world. They want to prove that this was wrong from the beginning.
I'm conscious that we are over our allocated finishing time, but I'm sure you'll agree that this is a real privilege to be able to have this discussion tonight. And it's also much warmer and drier in here than it is out there. So what I'd like to do is take a few more points from the floor. I would ask you to be as brief as possible, and I'm going to ask each of our panel members to give you maybe one takeaway thought from tonight, one key thought that they would like to share, and obviously allow the Ambassador the opportunity to respond fully to any remaining comments made.
You rightly, excuse me, Ambassador, you rightly stressed the need for education and its value. To what extent is education in Afghanistan right now being practiced across the whole country, rather than perhaps in Kabul and a few other of the large cities? And to what extent is that going to be important in creating a unified country in a political and economic sense?
Thank you. And behind.
Your Excellency, thank you for an interesting talk. I have an interest in media as well as culture and heritage, and I'm very interested to know whether, given the number and range of media sources you spoke about, whether there is a public service element about which includes the delivery of education through any of the media, or whether they're all commercial stations.
Thank you.
We'll start with the last
One
question.
more, and I promised one other gentleman here, so I better live up to my promises.
There's two gentlemen up there.
I think there's two now, but okay, well you can each have a very brief word then.
Hello, I'm Sam Phipps, Roddy's brother-in-law, so thank you for inviting me to a very interesting talk. My question is just about, on your last point, and you've mentioned this a few times, about sort of so-called negative stories coming in the press, portraying a pretty bad picture of what's going on. Are you saying that those reports are just exaggerated or not true at all, or are you just saying we don't get to hear enough of the more positive aspects of what's happening?
And the last short word from the
Yeah, thank you. I'm Goran from Iraq and I'm doing a PhD here. My question is that Afghanistan has seemed to be a blueprint for post-conflict countries, especially for Iraq. And one of the policies that are introduced is privatizing education and health system. Do you think that this is a good thing to do in post-conflict countries such as Iraq or Afghanistan or not? Sorry, it's
Can you
Could
repeat
you
that
repeat
question,
the
please?
last part of the question?
What was the question?
So a policy like privatizing the educational system or the health system, user fee, for example, charging user fees for patients in the health system in Afghanistan was a big policy. Do you think that this is a right choice to do in a post-conflict setting or not? Because Iraq is also thinking about doing
Very
this.
interesting question. Very interesting question. Well, as an educator, I start with the last question, if I may. I see as an educator a huge increase in the level of educational activity. But to tell you the truth, I'm not very sure about the quality. Education has become privatized, and education, higher education, and even primary education. We have Turkish schools, we have American schools for very high class people. The Turkish schools are wonderful, they're doing a very good job. But the other private schools, I'm not quite sure. Over time, we hope that the quality will go up. There are a number of reasons why the quality is low. The most important reason is lack of qualified instructors, especially at the higher education level. I tell you a little story. I know it's too late in the night. I went and gave a lecture at the college where I studied and I taught in the 70s. And somebody came and kissed my hand, a young, about 45, 50 years old man. And I said, well, who are you? He said, I was your student when you were teaching here. And I said, oh, okay, what happened? What do you do now? He said, I'm a professor here and I have a doctorate degree. I said, good. What happened? How did you get your doctorate degree? He said that in 1978, when the university lost professors like you, when I graduated in 1979, they sent us to Russia, and we studied there for a year, and I got my doctorate degree during a year, and I came back. And now I'm teaching, I'm a professor. You know, I had spent 2 years to get my master's degree at University. I had spent another 5 years in Germany to get my doctorate degree, total 7 years. And this guy had done it in 1 year. And when they were swarming at me, asking for the copy of my lecture. They were absolutely, they didn't know anything about market economy. So that is the reason why we have unacceptable quality at the higher education. At lower level education, at primary, the country has been able to train a lot of women teachers, and I'm seeing that the quality of primary education is much better than the higher education and the secondary education, because the teachers have been trained for the primary education but not for the secondary and the higher university level. It takes time. It takes time. But this is why I insist that wherever I go, I insist that we should bring Afghan students, young women and men, to get education here and go back and teach. That is how I think we can solve the problem, but it will be time consuming and it will require time. The negative stories, I would say yes, most of them are exaggerating. It's in the nature of media. In order to sell your story to Guardian or to Independent or to Telegraph, you have to sound very exotic. Of course, people inject things into their regular reporting that turn out to be out of place and exaggerated. But we have to live with it. We politicians have to live with it, and we consumers have to live with it. Otherwise, who's going to spend money on newspaper personalities unless they find something very exotic? The media type, as a person, as a father, as an educator, I have complaints because the educational content of media is relatively low. It is not at the level one would desire. This is also something that is in the nature of a nascent, of a newly developed media. They have to be exotic. And unfortunately, it has also created a lot of problems among the religious scholars. Some of the programs that are here are not acceptable from a religious point of view. That is why we have complaints. The educational, the state-run TV station is more educational than the private ones, because the private ones are commercial and they have to make money. But again, I think these are little aberrations and little problems that can be ironed out and eliminated as we go further. We learn, it's a learning process, and it seems to me that the Afghan people have a very high learning curve. They learn very quickly. So we hope that things will improve.
Okay. Roddy, would you like to share your final thought for the evening?
It sounds incredibly challenging, and I view the ambassador as being what indeed he is, a very brave guy, hunted by the Russians, had to leave the country, himself worked hard to get the qualifications he did. And I, of course, hope he's right. There's a rather unpleasant saying, which is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So whatever plans the country may have and what it wants to achieve, if the culture cannot be created in which these dreams flourish, there is a danger of failure. But I think that's where a country like Scotland comes in, with years of experience of working in Afghanistan and elsewhere in the world. And I think if we, through going there and young people from Scotland going out and teaching and getting involved, and companies from Scotland and the United Kingdom getting engaged, we can help those who want to change the culture ensure that their strategic goals are met and indeed exceeded.
Thank you for that. Professor Jeffery, your final word?
It's difficult to know where to stop and start here, because I think the project that you're setting yourself is, as you said yourself, a very long-term project. But I think what's coming clear from various comments from the floor, it's a very complicated project, and there will be an element of 2 steps forward, maybe half a step back if we're optimistic, or maybe 1 step back. But it's going to be a long-term activity which is going to be very, very tricky, and there's going to be a lot of argumentation about priorities and funding and how to create a system which does really generate this kind of civic responsibility that you emphasised, along with things that I would prioritise, like equality in terms of class as well as gender, in terms of rural, urban differences and so forth. There are huge challenges, huge structural and financial challenges which face any education system, and I've certainly seen this from both in Pakistan and in northern India, that places which are not post-conflict, who haven't got to deal with these very major problems that Afghanistan has faced over the last 3 decades, nevertheless they are still struggling to provide a sort of education system which does furnish equality of opportunity for all the country's children. So, best of luck.
Thank you very much. And Your Excellency, what is the main thought and the main message you would like all of us to take away from here tonight?
Well, being an ardent reader of history, I look at Afghanistan as part of the human history, and economic prosperity and development is not a very old phenomenon. It's relatively new in human life. Until 1700, from the first years of the Christ's birth until 1700, if you look at the data, the GDP per capita of the world moves like this. It was about $400 for almost 1700 years. And then comes 1750, the steam engine is invented, and suddenly the rate of growth goes from about 0.5% goes up. So I'm not very worried about these societies who have remained behind, like Afghanistan society, because these countries, a country like Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, they have the best chance, they have everything now available. They have the technology, they have the education, they have the systems. The only thing they have to do is to create the environment, a favorable environment for these existing things, the technology, the systems, and the knowledge to be implemented. In addition to that, as education goes forward, the barriers are taken down, people get closer, they learn how to cooperate positively with each other, and they learn how to tolerate each other. You know, there are 2 ways of cooperation. Either you force people by dictatorship to cooperate and build pyramids and have a big monument, or you provide them with personal, private incentives to do that. An efficient market economy, a reasonable market economy, in addition to paying heed to the issue of equality in the society, would do the job automatically. I'm an ardent follower of Adam Smith. Once socioeconomic development takes off, you cannot stop it. It can go automatically, and there's a benign circle, or instead of vicious circle of poverty, there is a benign circle of wealth that supports itself, and over time it can happen. So I think, as Mr. Daud mentioned, what the rest of the world, what countries like Scotland can do is to provide those Arab nations with education, with the tools and with the systems, help them to overcome the rigidity of the millennia that have befallen on them. And I think it will be done. So I'm a very optimistic person in this sense about the future, not only of Afghanistan, but also the other countries. You know, Asia is a humongous landmass. It has everything that you can think of. It has oil, it has people, it has the best land, it has the best resources. The only thing that separates us and have inhibited us from getting together and, you know, creating an integrated economic system like Europe has been, you know, petty political differences that we had in the past and still are keeping us hostage. And I hope that as the younger generation takes over, these old petty political games will go away and the younger generation will take over. Thank you.
Very much indeed, and now we are absolutely out of time, but I wonder if you can bear with me for 1 minute while I extend just a few thank yous. First of all, to all of you for coming and for asking such stimulating and interesting questions, and my apologies to those of you whose questions or points we weren't able to hear. Can I remind you there will be a short drinks reception now just outside, so hopefully you will get the chance to continue the conversation and perhaps ask further questions in an informal conversation with the Ambassador and our panel. Secondly, can I thank Roddy and the Asia Scotland Institute particularly for bringing the Ambassador here tonight and for helping to organise this event, but also I think for your ongoing relationship with the university and with the business school, and indeed all the wider work that you're doing, which is very much appreciated. To Professor Patricia Jeffery for joining us in the panel and sharing what I know is but one very small part of her range of insights on this subject. And again, I hope more of us will have a chance to speak further with her at the conclusion of the formalities tonight. And of course, most of all, I want to thank on all your behalf the Ambassador for joining us. I think for far too many of us, Afghanistan has remained a country where we have simply been aware of passing images on our TV screen more often than not, riven with conflict and, as you said earlier, negativity. But as you also reminded us, Ambassador, this country has invested heavily in your country, both through treasury and blood, I think was how you put it. And it is, I think, incumbent upon us to continue that investment as you as your country people move forward into the future. And I can only thank you for giving us such a much more textured and deeper insight into your country tonight. We are very grateful for that. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.